Well, welcome back to 1 Corinthians. We're in chapter 8 today. I've labeled this chapter the principle of love. Yesterday was the chapter about marriage. Today's the principle of love, and I've divided this up into a couple of sections. We see first the principle, this principle of love talked about in verses 1 through 3. Let me just take you back to the Gospels, to Gospel of Matthew chapter 22, verse 36, where we see, I think, what Paul's instruction here is derived directly from the Lord's words. He says, "Teacher," he's being talked to by Sadducees here. They say, "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" And he said to him, this is Jesus responding, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment, and the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself." On these two commandments depend the whole Old Testament, essentially, the law and the prophets, is what Jesus is saying there. And I think he's saying the same thing here in the first three verses. If anyone loves God, he is known by God. He says, let me just back up. Now, concerning food offered to idols, not something we have to deal with most of the time, we know that all of us possess knowledge. This knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. If anyone imagines that he knows something, he does not yet know as he ought to know. But if anyone loves God, he is known by God. So this idea of puffing up and avoiding that is love for the neighbor, and loving God here is to be known by God. So I think that's what Paul's talking about, and that's the principle, to bring the principle of love to bear. In the situation we see in the beginning of verse 4, it's this idea of food offered to idols. Now, the historical background here is that pagans would take meat. Maybe, for example, they were going to have a dinner in their home or a barbecue or just everyday meat, and they would take that meat to the temple, and the priest in the pagan temple would end up blessing that meat and setting that apart for an idol, setting apart. And Paul warns them that on the one hand, the reality is, and they know it, idols have really no existence. Paul's going to say later that there's demons behind that. I don't think he's contradicting himself. I think he's saying that the things that demons represent, or these idols represent, Zeus, Athena, what have you, would be, they don't exist. But what's behind this is a whole satanic system of deception. So Paul is saying here, look, we know these idols don't exist. Idols have really no existence. And then he talks about the contingency in verse 7. Some people don't understand that. Some people have come out of paganism, or perhaps just coming out of paganism, and they still have in their conscience, that is in their mind, this idea that there is a being behind this idol, and they can't shake that. So their conscience would be offended or disrupted or hurt should they observe a believer eating food sacrificed to the idol. So he warns them, if that's the situation, then don't cause another brother to stumble. Here's where the love comes in for the brother, is that we don't want to do anything that's going to slow down their spiritual growth. Again, we're talking, or in that case, get in way of their salvation as well, to confuse them. So he says, don't become a stumbling block. Use love, and let love constrain your actions. And the reason is, he gives in verses 10 through 13, that you may cause a brother to stumble. Again, stumble on the way to salvation, or stumble in their sanctification. And he warns them not to do that, and closes, therefore, if food makes my brothers stumble, I will never eat meat, lest I make my brothers stumble. So Paul is giving himself an example that he is going to give up this freedom, even though he knows better, even though he knows that there's nothing behind that idol. He is going to give up eating that food. He's going to give up doing that because for the sake of his brother. And we live in a time when a lot of times we talk in church about authenticity, being myself, being real me. I think a lot of times that is a disguise for narcissism, extreme self-centeredness, that I'm going to talk about whatever I want to talk about, my deepest, darkest secrets, my deepest hurts. I'm going to do what I want to do, and because that's me, I'm just being authentic. And if we don't give a thought to what that might do or the impact it might have on a brother or sister, we are violating this principle of love. So how do we apply this? I mean, probably today or tomorrow, or maybe for the rest of our lives, no one's going to offer us food sacrificed to idols. But this principle of not doing anything that would be a stumbling block for a brother or a sister extends to things, for example, like drinking. People have lots of different attitudes within the church about the appropriateness of drinking alcohol at all, much less in moderation. And if you are around people that drinking alcohol causes them to stumble in some way, then give that up, even though you want to, even though you know it might be okay, or that it's okay. Same thing with your entertainment, movies, music, things that you could handle, others can't. Those with sensitive consciences, particularly, maybe hear a music or see a movie, and that would hurt their conscience. Give that up. Put that aside for the sake of your brother. You might ask, is this hypocrisy? Am I putting on airs? Am I trying to be more holy than I am? I wouldn't look at it as hypocrisy as much as accommodation or part of your ministry to your brother or sister. Not hypocrisy, but curbing your freedom for their good. Same thing I spoke about authenticity versus love. Love is to be used among us to curb our freedoms in order to accommodate the growth, the spiritual salvation and growth of those around us. So God bless you, brothers. Tough lesson today. We're not used to giving up our rights. We're not used to forsaking the things that we want to do for the good of others. But that's what the Lord calls us to do. And I think that to the degree that you do that in your family or among your circle of friends, or particularly and specifically within your church, I think you'll see God's blessing on that. God bless you, brothers and sisters. So glad you're continuing in your reading. Tomorrow, Thursday, we move into 1 Corinthians 9, and we'll be talking about how Paul put this principle into place and surrendered his own rights.